Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's topic, which is in the assessment area, and we're dealing with creating tests and quizzes and exams. Basically, the true construction element. What types of questions can we use? How do we write those questions? And scoring those questions. There'll be some follow-up to this next week, particularly for the last section, which deals with constructed response questions. We'll be taking a look at things like short answer, essays, and the language task in more detail, and specifically the scoring elements for those exams. All right, let's get started. But before we do, let me just remind you again to download the study guide for this video. The study guide is very this video contains a lot of information. The study guide has already written a lot of things down for you and things like that. So please use it to follow through. Bring the study guide with you to class on Thursday, along with the course book Spark 1, which you bought in the first year of this program. And we're going to be actually taking a look at tests, determining if they're good or bad, and then also designing a test for a specific part in Spark 1. Okay, so the obvious place to begin is with the question, what is a test? Basically, a test is a measuring device intended to numerically describe the degree or amount of a construct to perform under uniform standardized conditions. Let me repeat that, although it's in your study guide for you to fill in some blanks. A test is a measuring device. A measuring device. That means in this case that we are going to produce some sort of information. Many people use it to produce a score, but it doesn't have to be its score. It can be for formative purposes as well, and it just tells us who knows what, who doesn't know what, or to what degree they know something or not know something. So a test is a measuring device intended to numerically describe. Again, most people give it a score numerically. Even if you look at numerically in terms of binary code, it's right or it's wrong. But that information can be very, very helpful in both a formative and summative assessment conditions. So a test is a measuring device intended to numerically describe the degree or the amount of a construct, meaning the degree, how much, or the amount of a construct. What elements of this concept do the students know or not know? So, one last time. A test is a measuring device intended to numerically describe the degree or amount of a construct to perform under uniform standardized conditions. Uniform standardized conditions. By that we mean every student takes the test the same way. Okay, so the time element's the same, the tests look the same, and things like that. Everything is uniform and standardized. Now, of course, there are variations of that in terms of students with special needs, and they may have extra time conditions, or they may be allowed to have the test read to them, or they may have somebody to write down the answers that they orally produce. Those variants don't necessarily change the standardization. They're just the adaptations we use for students with special needs, but it's still the same. So we start with a standardized element of time, and then a student who gets time and a half, we add a half of that time. So if the test is designed for an hour, then a student who gets time and a half has an hour and a half to complete the test. That doesn't mean that they're going to use the whole time, but that time is available to them. And as we're dealing more with mainstreaming students, it's very important that you know what those adaptations are for your students. Do you have a student who's dyslexia? Do you have a student who switches numbers? Those things are important to know, and then you have to use that information in the development of your test. So that's the definition. A test is a measuring device intended to numerically describe the degree or the amount of a construct to perform under uniform, standardized conditions. There's usually three parts to any test. The instructions to the test taker. In British English, they're often referred to as the rubrics. Okay, we're going to use the term directions or instructions. I think it's much clearer because we're going to use the term rubric for something else. The condition for performance, that is the question. What type of question is it? Selected response, constructed response, what type of selected response, what type of constructed response. That's the conditions. So what do they need to do to show that they can do this skill, that they know this knowledge, that they have this ability? And then finally, a scoring rule. And this is very important, and it's often the part that's overlooked by many people. If you're putting together simply a multiple choice test, that's easy. You know, the scoring rule is your answer key. But if you're putting together a fill in the blank or short answer or an essay or a language performance, your scoring rule is different in a different format. And we're going to take a look at those more in depth next week. But that is the third part, and it's very, very important. Most likely, you are giving achievement tests during the year. An achievement test measures changes in the student's cognitive behavior that result from instruction and training. So we're measuring, do the students know basically what I've taught them, or have the students mastered the objectives that these questions are linked to? So that basically is a test. So the definition, the three parts, and then the specific type of test that we're going to be giving, and that's achievement test. And there's other types of tests. We've already talked about diagnostic or pre-assessment tests, but there's also a lot of different tests that we can give. But those are the two that we're going to deal mostly with this semester. There's some key concepts to keep in mind when you're putting together a test. The first is it useful? What's the purpose? You know, every assessment that you produce needs to have a purpose. It needs to be able to tell you something, to tell the student something, to tell the parent something, to tell the school something. It needs a level of usefulness. This is a very, very important concept. So when you're designing a test, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what's the purpose of this test? Why will this test be useful to me or to my students? Especially if it's formative. What is its usefulness? If it's summative, in most cases, it's to help us issue a grade. Reliability. Reliability is a measure to determine how consistent the test is, or the consistency of the test scores. Meaning, if the students took this test on day 1 and then took this test on day 2, a test is reliable if the scores are significantly or statistically close. If the scores for some reason are not, it's probably showing that the students are doing too much guessing, and therefore the questions themselves are not reliable, or the material wasn't taught properly, one of the two. So reliability is very, very important. There are specific formulas to measure reliability, but there's things that we can do too to look at the test to determine if a question is reliable or if this test is reliable after the students have taken it without going through a series of statistical formulas. And we'll take a look at those. Validity. That is basically, does this test measure what it's supposed to? If this test is some sort of summative test at the end of a unit, does it measure the objectives this unit is focusing on? If not, the test is no good. It's not valid. A test has to have good validity. That is, it has to measure what you're intending to measure. And in that case, you need to make sure that you're going to link your questions to your objectives. So this question matches to this objective that I'm trying to get my students to master. Practicality. How teacher-friendly is this test? Is this test easy to administer, not easy to administer? Is it going to take a lot of time to correct? Is it not going to take a lot of time to correct? Yeah, practicality is an issue that you have to be concerned about, of course, but it shouldn't necessarily be an overarching reason to change the type of assessment you think you should give. Washbacks. That is, what are the effects of this test on the teaching, the teacher, the student, the learning, the school? the program. So, we want positive washbacks. That is, we'd like to say that this test is demonstrating that our students are mastering this content. Our teaching in this English program is highly effective because the students are doing significantly well on these forms of assessment. It's also important for feedback. There was a comment in class that, oftentimes teachers give a quiz and then they do nothing with it. That's not enough. Positive washback includes letting the students have appropriate feedback to show, especially if it's formative, to show this is what you need to work on, or this is what I need to reteach, or whatever the case may be. So we want to look for positive washback situations coming out of the test. Authenticity. Basically, does it reflect real world situations? And this is a difficult concept because sometimes multiple choice questions, true false questions, they really don't reflect true world applications, but we can often write them in such a way that they do reflect true real world applications and situations. So we have to be careful. We have to also be very careful, especially with constructed response. Will this produce the language I want the students to actually use? And you may produce a question, test it out with your students, and find out, ooh, it really wasn't authentic because it didn't produce the language that I wanted my students to produce. I need to, scrap this test and start over again. I need to adjust on a curve, whatever the case may be. In most cases, you're going to go with the former. Scrap the test, start all over again. Why penalize the students because you created a bad assessment? And transparency. Basically, is the information associated with this test going to be made available to the students? With formative assessment, transparency is automatic. The students are going to see it, get feedback on it, and learn from that. Usually with summative tests, feedback or the transparency is not always clear. But of course, these tests have to be kept for so many years. Anybody can come in and check them, including parents and students and things like that. So it must be available and be able to show that it was valid and reliable and practical and useful and had a purpose and authentic and provided positive washback. That's transparency. That's what you want with these tests. By the way, I should mention that if you received the English Teaching Forum from the U.S. Embassy, the very first article in that magazine for this month is on assessment literacy. You should read that article because it's very pertinent to this topic. If you don't have the magazine, have not received it, or have not subscribed to it, if you have not subscribed to it, subscribe to it, please. B, if you have not received the magazine yet for whatever purpose, please borrow somebody's who has received it and copy that article because we will be making reference to it in class. Alright. There's basically two types of questions or conditions for performance. Selected response questions and constructed response questions. Basically, selected response questions, these are the objective items. These are multiple choice and true, false, and matching. These are probably the ones that you're most familiar with. You are familiar with constructed response. Those would include things like fill in the blank, essays, short answers, things like that. Now, there are merits to using both. In terms of reliability, selected response has a higher level of reliability than constructive response. And that's because the scoring is pretty straightforward. In constructed response, there's a lot of leeway for subjective approaches to scoring. That's not the case in a selected response. So they tend to be more reliable in that sense. Also, students can do more selected response questions in a given period of time than they can do constructed response questions. That's usually one reason that teachers use them a lot. In terms of time to prepare the questions, though, constructed response comes out on top. It's much easier to write fill-in-the-blank questions or short answer questions or even essay questions than it is to write multiple choice questions and come up with all the distractors or appropriate true-false questions or coming up with two lists for matching questions. In terms of the time to score, though, of course, selected response comes out on top. They're much, much easier to score. I know in the past I've given, let's say, 150 to 200 multiple choice questions on a final exam for, let's say, 15 to 20 students. They can usually be scored in less than an hour. If your key is set up appropriately and things like that, you can bang those out in no time. Constructed response take a lot more time. You have to read the answer, often reread the answer, compare it to your scoring rule, and things like that, and make adjustments to your scoring rule if so be, if it looks like you've missed something throughout the process. In terms of flexibility for the students primarily, constructed response comes out on top. Because students can go down multiple paths to get to the same answer, it allows for much more flexibility than selected response questions. In terms of cost, this affects, like, in terms of standardized testing, which is not such a big thing here, but also cost in terms of your time. Of course, selected response comes out on top. They're easier to produce, therefore they're more cost effective in those cases. Student reactions. Actually, interestingly enough, student reactions to these two types of questions are mixed. Some students prefer selected response. Some students prefer constructed response. I'm sure it's the case with some of you. And in terms of validity, if you write the question based on your objectives, then both types of questions have good validity. So, but the key here is the questions must be matched to your objective, which we're going to talk about, which is very, very important. All right, in terms of selected response questions, we're going to take a look at those first. Here's the three general categories: multiple choice, true, false, and matching. And then we're going to look at some variations of these two, because if you're always giving the same thing, it gets a bit boring after a while. Okay. The types of constructed response we're going to look at here are the four: fill in the blank, the short answer, the essay, and the performance task or the language task. Today we're going to talk primarily about the fill in the blank. The other three, as I've said earlier, we're going to hold off till next week when we talk about more the language task and how the short answer and the essay can fit into that, and then the scoring rules that are appropriate for those. All right, let's take a look first at multiple choice questions. Yeah, there's advantages and disadvantages to using any of these types of questions. Here are the advantages and disadvantages for multiple choice. Of course, one of the best advantages is that they're highly, highly reliable. They can be quickly scored, and they can be set up in such a way that they reduce the guessing factor. They're much better at that than, let's say, the true-false, where you only have a 50-50 chance. There's a lot of versatility because it can measure all cognitive levels and skills, and that's very, very important. In terms of disadvantages, they can be very, very time-consuming to write. We have to make sure that we take into account the student's reading and writing abilities. We need to make sure that we don't neglect to write for higher level thinking, and we have to make sure that they don't encourage guessing. All right, let's take a look at a classic multiple choice format. Here's a question based on knowledge. The student misbehaved. What does misbehaved mean in this sentence? It's a knowledge question. The student has to apply knowledge here. The question, the student misbehaved, what does misbehave mean in the sentence, is called a stem. Then there's four answers. One of those answers is correct, behaved badly, which is the correct option. And then there's three options in this case that are incorrect. Those are called distractors. Probably the hardest thing to write in a multiple choice question is the distractor. And notice something here. The distractors in this case all begin with the very same word. So you can't just scan them very quickly and just look at the first word and say, oh, this is the answer. You have to carefully look at that second word. Behaved well, behaved quietly, behaved silently, behaved badly. And something to keep in mind here when you're writing these, as I said, distractors are the hardest things to write. And you're going to write them, especially in a language class, because the distractor is something that the students misunderstand. It's a common misunderstanding. So it might be very common for students to not misassociate or to not associate the prefix miss with the word badly. Therefore, that I used well, which is the opposite, or quietly and silently, which both mean the same thing. Because those are often misunderstandings with this word, and you have to keep that in mind when you're writing these. You have to write distractors not that are silly, but that are purposeful, because actually the distractor should tell you something. If a student chooses a distractor, it's because the level of the distractor tells me this is what they know well or not well, and then I can help them with that. Here's an example of a classic multiple choice for a skill. Which of the choices below is correctly written? In this case, combining two sentences. In red, he has. No, there's no punctuation here. In red, period, he has. In red, comma, he has. In red, and of course you would have something else with this question, but it's a common type of skill question. And then you can have questions for ability. What do they know? In this case, Laura is booking a hotel room over the telephone. She needs to find out if she can use her husband's credit card. He is not there. What should she ask the customer service representative? Which one of those statements? So the ability, can they for a situation come up with a solution? Now there's a lot of variations of the multiple choice question. That was a very classic multiple choice. So let's take a look. A common variation is to have an incomplete sentence. With his skis and poles, Joe was happy, blank, blank, blank. In this case, to go skiing, to do skiing, to make skiing. And in this case, look at the distractors. They deal with the collocations of the word skiing, and that's important. So do you do ski? Do you make ski? Do you go skiing? Or do you just to skiing? And B is totally incorrect, of course, because you would never say that. And then hopefully they would choose A, because skiing would be associated with the word go in this case. The best worst answer, which choice best completes this sentence, meaning you're going to give them other choices that can complete this sentence, but which one is the best choice? So for example, he likes blank more than she does. He likes to ski more than she does. He likes to go skiing more than she does. He likes skiing more than she does. He likes going skiing more than she does. Yeah, all those answers can fit in there, but what is the best in terms of language used? And in this case, most likely the answer is he likes skiing, C, more than she does. Because oftentimes the word like is followed by the gerund, and that's easier. And then why in English we would never put going skiing. He likes to go skiing would be more appropriate than going skiing, but he likes skiing is the best possible choice. You can do worse, although you're going to find out we're going to say that you should avoid any type of negative questions if you can. Although there's sometimes that they work well, and at the higher levels they work even better. Complex multiple choice. In this case, you give them a stem. You give them various options. In this case, we're looking at an underlined verb phrase. And then we have to determine what is the tense and what is the mood. You give them choices, and then your actual choices, your A, B, C, D choices, is a combination of these. So in this case, has been gone Obviously, that's present perfect. That should have another tense in here just to be on the safe side. But it's also, is it active or is it passive? In this case, it's passive, so the answer is B. That's a complex multiple choice. Some people will tell you that this is not a good question, but actually, it's a question that allows for higher order thinking skills, and I think that's important. So I do think in certain situations, this is a viable question. This is just a two-option thing here. Which sentence contains an indirect object? You could add a third option or even a fourth object. He wants her to leave him alone. He gives her the presents before he leaves. So the student has to look, they have to know what a direct object is, they have to look to see which sentence actually gives it to me. And hopefully you've said the answer is B, her, in that question, in the question and statement. In option B. Then we have something called binary multiple choice. Binary multiple choice is most associated with when we give reading and listening. So here's the idea is we give them text, and then based on that text, we have a series of questions, multiple choice questions, that are associated solely with that text. We do the same with listening. These are examples of binary multiple choice questions. And then finally, you can do something like this, a combination. It looks like a fill in the blank, but instead we give them choices in brackets. So Joe goes, went, has gone, had gone to the store before he came to the party. The student has to underline or circle the correct verb phrase. In the second one, underline the words that should begin with a capital letter. Again, it's a form. It looks like multiple choice, but it's actually or it looks like a fill in the blank type of thing, but it's actually more of a multiple choice question. But there's multiple answers. Multiple answers are fine in situations like this. I'd be leery to use multiple answers when I've got A, B, C, D options. I think it gets more tricky for our students. Rules for writing. Basically, you should make sure that the verb is in the stem. Include words normally repeated in the options. That should be in the stem. So, for example, if he likes two, if all the answers are going to begin with two, 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 put two back into the stem and not in the option. Make sure there's only one correct response. Make sure you look at it from the student's point of view, and that they're not going to think that, they're not going to say that this is correct, and if it is, then change it. Make all options for an item homogeneous in content, form, and grammatical structure. Make sure that they look all the same. Oftentimes students will look for the one that doesn't look the same, and that's the correct answer. That's the same for the length. Make sure that they all are the same length, basically. Avoid all of the above, none of the above. They give you there's no valid reason to use them, actually. Write a multiple answer type question or change it to a short answer question or something if you need to use all of the above or none of the above. Avoid making the correct responses longer than the distractors. Sequence choices, if possible, alphabetical order, time sequence, whatever the case may be. Put them in a sequence that makes sense. Each item is independent, and list choices vertically. There's a lot of research to say that listing the choices vertically is easier for the students to follow along. So don't list the choices horizontally, list the choices vertically. Don't be trying to save space here, folks. All right, true, false, and matching. First, true, false. Here are the advantages and disadvantages. Yeah, the biggest is they're so easy to write, but the biggest disadvantage is there's too much guessing. So we have to be careful. You have to be careful with these. We're going to talk about some ways to use them that are effective, but true, false on its own usually is not very effective. Here are some formats. The traditional format. Just circle T or F or write T or F. I traveled on bus today. Is that sentence correct? No, false. They flew by plane yesterday. That sentence is correct. You could also take the same questions, underline the piece that you're focusing on, and have them change it if the answer is false. I traveled by bus today. They flew by plane yesterday. True, so they changed nothing. A variation is to create some sort of table like this, and then in this case have them choose between by and on. So in this case, by goes for everything except foot. You go on foot. Another choice is to do something more like this, and this multiple true false. It's one question, and either we give partial credit scoring here, or to get credit for the whole question, they have to answer all of them correctly. That's sometimes easier and more valid. In this case, like I need to understand the concept of countable and uncountable nouns. That's one objective, so score it all together. Okay, so either it's all right or it's all wrong type of thing. Again, avoid trivia. Make sure it's significant content. Make sure the items are either true or false and nothing in between. One major point per item. Avoid trick questions. Don't use words like always, all, or never. Those are true indication that the statement's false. Avoid negative, because that can be very confusing, especially if it's false. You know, you're looking at a negative statement, and then you've got to think of it as being negative itself. So that makes it very difficult for the student. Put the items in a random order. Avoid making truer items longer than false items. And use slightly more false items than true items, if you can. And I'll tell you a little trick in class for how to decide where the answer should be for multiple choice and now for true false as well. So matching. Matching is pretty consistent. Usually there's two columns, and the students have to match the item from one column to the other. This is very, very common question. It's very, very good question, actually, because we often ask students to make associations. So although we simply use them for recall or factual information, they can be set up in such a way that they really, really trigger some higher level thinking. Here is the traditional. What I'd like you to notice is that the second column, the A through F column, has one extra option. There should always be one extra option in the column they have to match with. Always. Because if not, then it simply becomes a guessing game, and you want to take that out. As the students get older, make it 2 options or 3 extra options, and vary them where they are. Here's another one that's a pretty much higher level thinking, where you give them, in this case, the teaching approach using EFL, and the students have to look at the situation and say, which approach does this talk about? This is referred to as an extended matching. Again, rules: use homogeneous material in each list. Include directions that clearly state the reason for matching. Put the problems or stems in a numbered column to the left and the responses to the right. Keep the responses as short as possible. Always include more responses than questions. Arrange the list of responses in an alphabetical or numerical order possible. Again, sequencing is important. And again, all responses, including the incorrect ones, must be plausible. Okay, those are the 3 basic categories of selected response: multiple choice, true, false, and matching. Now, there are alternatives sometimes to these types of questions. One alternative is referred to as sequencing or ranking. In this case, the students have to write the numbers 1 through 5 in the left column to show the correct order of the writing process. These are very good questions. They can happen. You can use them, let's say, for the structure of a specific type of letter, a letter of complaint, let's say, the structure of a conversation or a speech or something like that. They're very, very useful. Another one is categorization. We often ask our students to categorize stuff. So why not ask them, in this case, to put list of food items into the correct groups? The problem is scoring. How do we score them? And you really can't just say, it's right or it's wrong. It's especially in the ranking ones. It's not that it's right or it's wrong, it's that we're looking at the order. So we have to say to ourselves, yeah, how off is the order? That determines how we develop the score. And the same with categorizing. How off are the groupings? And we're going to look at specific ways to do this. It can be very, very time consuming and very, very formulatic. But if you want to use these types of questions, and we're going to talk about these are the ways that you should score them appropriately. All right, we're going to take a look at constructed response. Like I said, we're going to look at these examples, but we're only going to talk a little bit about the fill in the blank. Here's 2 examples of fill in the blank. The hotel clerk asked to see the blank blank when the Smiths were checking into the hotel, and Tom blank blank football last night. Some people say that the blank should be closer to the end. That's not as much of an issue as some people like to say. What is important, though, are the key words. You have to give them enough information that they can come up with the correct word. For example, in the second sentence, Tom blanked football last night. Yeah, it looks like there could be a lot of verbs that could go in there, but because I didn't say the football game or a football or the football team or something like that, it changes the amount of options. So the grammar became very important. In the first sentence, we have the hotel clerk and the Smiths were checking into the hotel. Checking in, they should know what that means you're arriving for the very first time. So what is it the clerk would ask to see? But I hope that what you're seeing is that there are multiple answers for both of these questions, and that's often the case. It's so hard to write a fill-in-the-blank question where, there's only one correct answer. Almost impossible. Almost impossible. So you have to develop appropriate scoring rules. I mean, if there's the possibility that it has more than one answer, you need to know what all those answers can be. Here's a scoring guide for the first question. I'm looking for a booking to see the booking confirmation or the confirmation letter. So let's say I would give them full credit, 2 points for that. But if they just put in the booking, actually that would be acceptable in English. The letter, okay. Not enough information. The printout, okay. Again, not enough information. The confirmation, again, the confirmation what? They could have also written the email, also the confirmation email instead of the confirmation letter. But look at what the 0 point says. An answer that does not refer to a written document. So I'm looking, all of these documents I'm giving points to are something that are written, associated with what this clerk would want to see. If they put an answer there that does not refer to a written document, I'm not giving it any point. But it's okay in fill-in-the-blank type questions to give partial credit based on the degree of appropriateness of their answer. That's always correct. There's too many people only give it as a right or wrong, and I am totally against that. You are demotivating the students when you do that. Give them credit for doing something right if they did something right. There's nothing wrong with that. Here's one for the other one. Watched, played, an appropriate active verb in the past tense. There's not too many more that can go in there, I think. But maybe half point, I would give them if they chose the appropriate active verb but put it into the incorrect tense, I would give them half a point. It all depends on my rubric. If my rubric says fill in the blank with the correct word and correct tense, I'm looking for 2 different things. So give them credit for two different things. If they use the wrong verb but in the right tense, give them credit for at least using the right tense. There's nothing wrong with giving a half a point here. And then 0 points, of course, inappropriate active verb in the incorrect tense. That just means they're totally off base here. Okay? So a scoring rule is so important, and this is something you're going to work in class on. A short answer. A short answer means that it may be a paragraph or a list or something like that. Name the various parts of a person's face. For each, give an adjective that can be used. So eyes. beautiful eyes, nose, pointy nose, mouth, big mouth, something like that. And again, you would need to make some sort of scoring rubric. If you taught specific collocation, then those would get full credit, and maybe something like big mouth would only get partial credit. So again, and you need to look at all the pieces here, and what are you giving credit for? You got to give credit for naming the parts of the person's face and naming an adjective that can be used for that part. So there's two different things here. The scoring rule has to reflect that. An essay. Protest songs have been very important in the history of English-speaking countries. So again, always begin with some general statement. Use the graphic organizer to create a structured essay discussing the popularity of protest songs in America. Okay, you don't have the graphic organizer here, but look what I did. An essay doesn't always have to be just do it from memory. An essay could be with a text, a listening text or a reading text, then write an essay about it. It could be with a graphic organizer to help them structure it. It depends on what you're looking to do, actually. This comes from actually Spark 4 actually, which has a World War I unit in it. It deals with protest songs. And the thing is that I'm looking for them to use the language that was taught. I'm not necessarily looking for them to structure an essay here because we haven't done that completely. So by giving them a graphic organizer or an outline, they can follow that and then they produce the appropriate paragraphs. But I'm still looking for, because we did do in this this unit, we talked about things like sentence combining and complex sentences and transition sentences. So I'm looking specifically for those things. And again, my scoring rule is going to say that, as opposed to, do they have their paragraphs in the correct order? Yeah, that's important, of course, but I've already given them the structure, so it's okay. So you should always give them, the prompt does not necessarily have to be so open that it leads for various structures. You can give them a graphic organizer, you can give them a text, you can give them a listening text to help them with the essay. And then specific to what we're doing is the language task. You have just returned from your summer holiday, you are meeting a friend for coffee. Your friend wants to know all about your trip. How authentic is that, really? I mean, it happens all the time. I come back from my trip, people want to ask me about it. So to help explain it, you bring 5 photos with you to the cafe. Tell your friend about the highs and lows of your vacation using the 5 photos. Okay, so this is a speaking task in most cases. Your student has to bring 5 photos, has to talk about them, and things like that. This is an authentic type of task. It would cover a lot of information, depending, again, what our objectives are. And also the scoring has to be very, very objective. So we have to produce a rubric, some sort of scoring guide to help us really focus on the variation and the degree of knowledge that can appear here. So that is an introduction to creating testing quizzes. We're going to be looking primarily at the selected response and the fill in the blank in class this week, and then we're going to take a look at the other types of constructed responses in the following week. And the scoring rules that go with them. So again, please remember to bring Spark 1 with you to class, and bring your study guide, which has a lot of this information, because one of the first things you're going to do is analyze a test that the publisher has produced for Spark 1. What types of questions do you see? Do you think these questions are valid? Is this test purposeful, useful? Do you think it has reliability, validity, things like that? And then we're going to fix it, and then you're going to create a test for a specific piece of Spark 1. Okay, so enjoy this video. Make sure you bring all that material with you, and I'll see you in class later this week. Bye.